And so this starts to sound much more like the atheist who says, our planet is put here because aliens planted people here. It's almost exactly that. But the difference is one person calls themselves an atheist and one person calls themselves a Mormon Christian.
See, hold on a
their
second.
belief
That is not Latter-day Saint teaching. I don't even know what to do with that. Hello, Saints. My name is Jeff. I'm a pastor in Utah, exploring everything I can about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And as I was scrolling on YouTube recently, a thumbnail caught my attention, and the title said, Mormons are atheists. And this was from a really popular Christian/Catholic podcast. So I want to drill into two things. One, this assertion that Latter-day Saints are atheists. Let's unpack that a little bit. And two, some observations about interfaith dialogue. Because what we had here were two Roman Catholics talking about Latter-day Saints without a Latter-day Saint present. And since I'm a third-party Protestant, and I'm perfectly objective in that seat, I thought I'd give you my thoughts on that. So let's dive in.
All right. Well, here's the question. Why are Mormons atheists?
So it's a very loaded question, and I think it's the kind of thing that is likely to hurt someone's feelings. So I want to be clear.
Yeah, don't say.
Let me give a preamble to the answer, if you don't mind. Dealing with members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS, Mormons, they often come in with a certain experience of having been misunderstood, misrepresented, mischaracterized.
Yes, this is true. By the way, I should state off the bat here, this is a Pints with Aquinas podcast, super popular. I know tons of Protestants and Catholics that watch this. Matt Fradd, who is the host, is a really well-known name. He's had some really compelling interviews. And then you have Joe Heschmeyer, who is somebody who works with an organization called Catholic Answers. I think he's a Catholic apologist. He recently had a debate with a Latter-day Saint, Jacob Hansen. And I think that both of these guys are off the bat desiring to set the stage of like, okay, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, which I can appreciate. And you know what? I believe them. The problem is there's a bit of a dichotomy to start with this super clickable, provocative YouTube title, The Incoherence of Mormonism, but then to start off saying, they have a tendency to get their feelings hurt. We're going to put a pin in that and come back to it. But I want to get into the crux of what they were talking about when it comes to this claim of atheism. Let's see if we can unpack it.
So there's two things. One, how many gods are there? Two, what do we mean by gods? And this is going to get to the heart of what we mean in saying, philosophically, Mormonism is a species of atheism.
Okay.
Because imagine someone who says, I don't believe there's a God who created everything, but I do believe there's a spiritual realm of ghosts and demons and angels. And if you want to call some of those angels and demons gods, go nuts.
Yep, I get it.
But they didn't create the universe.
Right.
That is very similar, actually, to where a Mormon ends up.
Right, so
because
philosophically, they don't believe in a creator of all creation.
Yes, exactly. They reject the idea of creation from nothing. They believe in creation from pre-existing matter. And if you ask where that pre-existing matter comes from, you get the same kind of shrug of the shoulders.
Okay, I just want to pause right there. I don't know if this is an apples-to-apples comparison. I understand what they're saying here. When it comes to philosophically speaking, one could, I guess, logically make a connection between people who believe that there might be a spiritual realm of sorts with ghosts and demons and angels and stuff like that without there being a creator God. Isn't that what a lot of atheists say? First of all, I would maybe push back right away and say, I don't know, is it? I mean, I know a lot of atheists, and I've talked to them about their beliefs, and I think where they say that we're all here by happen chance, it's all probability, the fact that we're here, they don't really spend a lot of time, usually, and I know this is anecdotal, but talking about like spiritual realm, most of them deny any sort of spiritual realm. So I first of all, just don't know if this is apples to apples. I don't know very many atheists that put an emphasis on a spiritual realm. Latter-day Saints do. But there's other considerations that I want to speak to that, but let's listen in a little bit more.
And
so God is not a creator. Their God, lowercase g, is not a creator.
Steel manning it, they're going to say he's a creator in the same way that any artist is a creator.
Okay.
Like when you create content, when you build a statue, we can call Michelangelo a creator in a certain sense, but he doesn't create the marble. He just turns the marble into something beautiful.
Athanasius is on the Incarnation.
Mm-hmm.
he talks about this.
Yes.
He makes this
I don't think he
distinction.
mentions Michelangelo, but you're right.
No, but he does make the distinction. If I'm not creating out of nothing, then I'm like a carpenter that fashions something. I make something,
Right.
I don't create it.
This is much more the idea of like what we would call a demiurge. So they don't believe in God strictly speaking. They believe in a carpenter, not a creator of everything.
Okay, so by the way, I do want to speak to something here really quick. Joe Heschmeyer is a Catholic apologist that I do believe has spent a lot of time researching the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I'm in no way, shape, or form even going to claim that I know more than him, that I've studied more than him, because I bet you that's not the case. So I just want to put that off the bat. I think Joe is really doing the best he can to articulate what Latter-day Saints believe. But that's really tricky because he's not a Latter-day Saint, which is why I think it would have been really good to have a Latter-day Saint here to be able to sort of articulate some of these things. And I don't know if a Latter-day Saint would communicate the idea of God and material and the universe the way that he just did it. I think there's a lot of mystery in the LDS world when it comes to what is material, what is consciousness, are there eternal consciousness? And, I know there's a lot of theoretical conversation that has been brought into discussion in the LDS world, but most of it is left in that realm of mystery, where we can't know after a certain point as to what is the material universe like, generally speaking, and how do all the consciousness play into it. That said, I do understand where Joe is coming from here when he says that Latter-day Saints sort of place God at least in the universe as opposed to outside of it. I think that is accurate. Mainstream Christians, this is where Protestants and Catholics would agree, believe that God is outside of time and space. He's outside of the created universe. I mean, he can enter into it any time in any way that he would like, but he is transcendent over it, so he's not subject to it. And there is no pre-existing material outside of what he has spoken into existence. This gets into the issue of ex nihilo, which gets very technical, but it is something that Protestants and Catholics agree on, that Latter-day Saints don't ascribe to. And I think that's what they're getting at here.
So what is God? God is the unconditioned ground of existence, the only uncaused cause,
I would agree with this.
Metaphysically necessary being whose non-existence is impossible, the creator of all creation. That's what we mean by
Yes.
God. Yeah, okay. Mormons don't believe in a thing like that.
Exactly. And
Am I wrong?
They would regard a thing like that as the corrupting influence of pagan philosophy.
So they don't believe in God.
Yeah, they don't. What we mean by God, they would reject as being
But what
contrary to Scripture.
But what we mean by God is correct.
Correct.
So they don't believe in God.
And so this
Is that what you're saying, Joseph?
It is.
Okay.
That the arguments that would disprove atheism from reason are almost all of them also arguments that disprove Mormonism.
Contingency argument.
Exactly.
Do that. Show us that.
So, okay, this is the third of the 5 ways that St. Thomas Aquinas lays out. And he says...
By the way, really quick, Thomas Aquinas is a church father. He was active in thinking and teaching right around, I want to say like 1200 AD. But he was incredibly influential when it comes to arguments we still use to this day on existence with an uncaused cause, or you might say an uncreated creator. Super important, held in really high esteem, not just by Roman Catholics, but also Protestants.
Our existence, it has a beginning. We only exist under certain conditions, or we continue in existence under certain conditions, and we could be snuffed out of existence. So we exist under, we'll just say condition X. It's really like a billion different contingencies, but we'll just make it really simple.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at any of the things that we are contingent on, our mom and our dad, or oxygen, or any of these things, and say, does that have to exist? Or is that also contingent? Well, it's also contingent. Everything in the cosmos that we encounter is contingent. Here's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you have only contingent things, nothing will ever come into existence.
Right.
Like if everyone else says, I'm only going to go to the party if that other person shows up first, no one's ever going to the party. You need something that is not contingent. You need something called necessary.
Okay, so I don't need to fully rehash what he just said because it's pretty straightforward, but the logical argument is that if everything in existence is contingent on something, then nothing can exist because there has to be a necessary agent that contingency begins with, right? That's what he's saying. Let's hear what the second part of this argument is.
Imagine you come to a railway crossing and you see boxcars going by. Now, each boxcar is contingent upon the one before it. It wouldn't be there if there wasn't something pulling it along. and you flat surface, so you can't make the earth the thing that they're contingent on. We'll make it really easy. You don't see the engine car, but you know there has to be one. And it doesn't matter if you have 10 boxcars or a billion boxcars or any number of boxcars. The more boxcars you have, the more you actually need a very powerful engine to be pulling all of those things. You have to have something that satisfies intellectually the whole that we recognize. Okay, the whole in what we experience is there must be something necessary or none of us would be here. We need something big enough to plug that hole, and that hole seems infinitely large.
Yeah.
And so it must be one who's able to account for its own existence.
Whose essence is existence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what he's talking about here is essentially just a logical argument for a transcendent God. I like the way he put it right there when he said, based on the vastness of the universe, in order to have a cause big enough for the vastness of this universe, this is a God that is essentially like infinite and transcendent in ways that is just mind-boggling. So this is a logical argument, comes from Thomas Aquinas, that he's re-articulating. I kind of am okay with this whole boxcar analogy. I think that it makes sense when it comes to maybe the movement of a train, because a boxcars can't move unless you have an engine that's sort of causing that movement. But it kind of breaks down because boxcars aren't a result existentially of a train engine. But there's no illustration that's perfect, and every illustration breaks down eventually. But I get where he's coming from, and I would agree as a Protestant historic Christian with the logic behind a transcendent God, which can be an important exercise to go through so that we're not always just relying on, like, what does the Bible say? And then being accused by non-Bible believers of using circular arguments. Well, the Bible says that God exists, therefore God must exist, therefore the Bible must be authoritative because it says that God exists and God gave us the Bible. You start to spin into circular reasoning. So are there ways for us to make an argument for the existence of God without using the Bible? That's what this does. It's a widely used approach by a lot of Christians and apologists.
We got to give their God a different name so we know what we're talking about, like Jeff or something.
Odin, yeah. I mean, it is much similar to some of the pagan conceptions of...
No, we're not going to give him the name Jeff. It's too much pressure. On behalf of all Jeffs, we'll pass. I would prefer to stick with Yahweh. I think it's a good name.
Tell our viewers what Kolob is and if it's still taught and where it is.
So this is the idea, as we were talking about this planet being the
Earth?
one, yeah,
Yep.
our planet being populated by God, but him being from another one. So that raises all these questions of where is God's planet, and is it in the cosmos? And particularly if God is
I don't think it's
material,
officially
how does that
taught either.
work? Is there, like, if we took a rocket ship far enough, could we find God's planet? But the argument is that on some planet, God the Father was once a man. It doesn't seem to have been Earth, because this is a planet he created and populated. It seemed to have been some other planet he was a guy on. And so this starts to sound much more like the atheist who says, our planet is put here because aliens planted people here. It's almost exactly that. But the difference is one person calls themselves an atheist and one person calls themselves a Mormon Christian. But their belief about the origins are both an alien being put the first seeds of life here.
See, hold on a second.
Okay,
that is not Latter-day Saint teaching. I don't know. I don't even know what to do with that, because Latter-day Saints have in the past, again, I think there have been certain teachings that have come about that might even trace back to the King Follett sermon, that God was once a man. I get it. But I don't think that Latter-day Saints are teaching that God lived on a planet. I think they leave that in the realm of mystery. They believe that in some way he's been progressing or exalting in some sense. And I know that some have theorized, well, maybe he was on another planet one day, but that's not official church teaching. So I think the refresh button needs to be hit here. Because if that was taught at some point, I know it's not taught now. I've not heard current Latter-day Saints make that assertion, that God at some point lived on a planet. Even this fixation on Kolob, there's a lot of misunderstanding of what Kolob is and even how central it is to Latter-day Saint teaching and doctrine. So I had a conversation with a Latter-day Saint recently that says it gets problematic when these types of conversations go this direction because they're majoring on issues that are not major to Latter-day Saints. They've existed in a theoretical realm of conversation at some point, but it's not the official belief taught by the church today.
Joseph Smith says he was once a man, like we are now, correct?
Yes.
Do modern Mormons believe this?
Yes, but
Okay.
there's some flex in the joints.
Golly, it's like trying to nail Jello to a wall.
I used that exact expression in my debate with Jacob Hansen. And I think LDS listening to this should at least realize how difficult it is for non-LDS to fairly critique the position.
When they keep changing.
And when you can find LDS who just say, oh, well, we don't think that necessarily happened. But yeah, so...
Okay, well, here's my... Okay, let me...
I'm not going to disagree with that, but it is really hard for us outside of the church based on the fact that there is ongoing revelation and, there are things that were taught by past prophets that Latter-day Saints say, yes, it was taught at some point, but they weren't codified as Latter-day Saint doctrine. And we do believe that prophets can be fallible. So it can be really difficult for those of us on the outside to figure out, what is it exactly that you believe? Because there have been so many evolutions to various aspects of Latter-day Saint teaching. So that's what they're grappling with here. So even though I wouldn't arrive at some of the conclusions that they're arriving with here, I do have to agree that it is difficult. It is laborious for non-Latter-day Saints to try to figure out what is the current stance of Latter-day Saints based on a past stance or belief.
It almost seems like if the Big Bang Theory is true, it might disprove
That's right.
Mormonism.
That's right. I think that is actually correct. That if creation has a beginning, if time has a beginning, then some of these claims don't seem to work. And if their theory about how the Big Bang happens or any of this is just, well, it just happens on its own, then it becomes very clear that we're dealing with a species of atheism, a very colorful species of atheism, a spiritually rich species of atheism.
Okay, so I get the logical assertion that he's making here, that any concept of God that takes him out of this transcendent, holy existence and brings him into an existence that is adjacent to or maybe even subject to the laws of the universe and the material universe, I get it. At that point, does that break down the transcendent holiness of God? Obviously, I'm going to lean toward that. Yeah, it does. I don't know if that necessitates the label atheism, though. I understand the argument. I just don't agree with it. And I also feel like this is a really good example of following a philosophical line of thinking while neglecting other factors, other schools of thinking when it comes to spirituality and experience and how a community worships and how faith concepts are passed down through generations. I think all of those are going to contribute to whether a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a theist or not. I also just don't feel like it's kind to say something like this, because when we move beyond philosophy to the person, there's not a single member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who believes in Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ and the Godhead that would say that they're atheist. It flies in the face of the passions and the experiences and really the spiritual journey that I think Latter-day Saints are on. And it also just further sets them outside of even interfaith dialogue when you say they are atheist. Sure, we can make an argument as to the nature of God and whether he is subject to the material universe or not. I get the importance of that. I think we can even make an argument for whether Latter-day Saints are polytheists, if there are an infinite regress of gods. Did Heavenly Father have a Heavenly Father? All these other things. I get that. But I think there's a stronger argument to say that there might be some incompatibilities when it comes to their theistic views without settling to say they're atheistic. But I want to fast forward to a moment where they get into a less philosophical conversation and more of an interfaith consideration that was really interesting as a Protestant to hear two Catholics talking about interfaith with the Latter-day Saints. Let me give you my thoughts there.
What does the next 5 years look like, would you say, between Christians and Mormons?
That's a good question. I think that they are becoming part of the public consciousness in a deeper way, that they were on the fringes of the periphery, and then in our lifetimes, they've become more well-known and were originally an object of just mockery and derision by a lot of Americans. South Park, the Book of Mormon musical, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think now you're going to have more of an appreciation for the unique kind of genius that you find within Mormonism, but also more of an engagement with the obvious logical and philosophical and theological problems. So I suspect you're going to see more of two things. One, you will probably get Christians who convert to Mormonism because they realize it's stronger than it was presented to them as. For a lot of people growing up, they were given such a caricature of Mormonism.
Or they were given what Mormonism was 100 years ago.
Sure.
I think that this is accurate. I think that so many people who are unfamiliar with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are operating off of an old script or some sensationalized version of Mormonism from people outside of the church who were putting together sort of a counter-propaganda campaign against the LDS church. That exists. And there might be a lot of cases where people actually sit down with an earnest desire to truly understand and seek what Latter-day Saints believe and might be compelled to agree with it. I think that that is true, especially the more Latter-day Saints become mainstream in their role in the conversation. So yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
You will see more of a softening of the Mormon position towards Trinitarian Christianity, where there was much harsher language used in the late 19th century and early 20th century. There's a softening, and they start to realize, like, oh, maybe God's working through these people as well. And you get some of that in Joseph Smith. It's a tonal shift more than a substantive shift.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's already happening. I have experienced Latter-day Saints being super open to and welcome to my Protestant beliefs, not because they necessarily want to agree with it, but because there's a softening. They're not necessarily going after me because I am a Trinitarian Christian. Now, I can't say the same for every Latter-day Saint influencer right now because for some reason they keep going after the Trinity. But when it comes to my Latter-day Saint neighbors and friends and people that work with the interfaith department with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they're so open-minded and they like celebrate the fact that we hold a Trinitarian view, even though they don't hold that view. So I do think that there's more openness and maybe a less threatened posture Latter-day Saints are taking when it comes to mainstream Christian beliefs. I would even go so far to say that Latter-day Saints are interested in learning from mainstream Christians when it comes to how we study the Bible, how we regard Jesus, how we understand grace. So to the credit of Latter-day Saints, there is an openness and a softening that they are presenting that I can't say that a lot of Protestant evangelicals are offering at this point. And I can't speak for Catholics, but I think they might be at least tacitly indicating that as well.
So they're trying to present as more of a Christian movement, where they would never have just out and out denied that, but you would find some earlier Mormon writers who distinguished Mormonism from Christianity. And young Mormons, I think, overwhelmingly think of themselves as Christian.
Yeah, that's true. I think that that is true. I have talked to I have talked to Latter-day Saints of an older generation who told me that when they were growing up, they did not want to be called Christians. They wanted to be called Mormons. So that has shifted, obviously. And I think a lot of younger Latter-day Saints, they don't even know about that. They're like, what are you talking about? We've always considered ourselves Christians. I mean, if you don't believe me, look in the comment section right now of this video. You're going to have some people saying, I remember when we didn't want to be referred to as Christian because we were Mormon, and other Latter-day Saints saying, no, we've always considered ourselves Christian. So that is part of the evolution and the reality of what we have to kind of maneuver through. But as far as things stand today, I think the overwhelming majority of Latter-day Saints would say we are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we are Christian.
This is why I don't love that you keep referring to them as LDS. Latter-day Saints. I understand that you're trying to be respectful, but if it's a propaganda,
well, no, they would say LDS is now actually an outdated term.
I know, but
now
you're not using the word. You said Mormon earlier, and when I'm not trying to be disrespectful, and neither am I.
Right.
But why do we have to tell a heretical group? I'm using that word broadly.
Yeah.
They weren't Christians, but why do we have to go by what a non-Christian group says about itself if it's just muddying the waters?
Well, I think for the sake of clarity and charity. So I'm fine using terms like Eastern Orthodox, even though I don't think they're the ones who are orthodox on the questions that we're disagreeing on. But it's the term they're known by. And as a Catholic...
So if they change their name to the True Church of Jesus Christ, would you call Orthodox that?
If there was a lot of the reasons I don't say Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is just because it's a mouthful.
That's true.
So True Church is pretty much what the Orthodox Church means.
No, but I'm just saying, if the Eastern Orthodox, let's say the Russian Eastern Orthodox Church, I know we're just spitballing here, but if they chose to change their name to the one and only True Church of Jesus Christ, presumably you wouldn't start calling it that.
No, but my reasons for not calling them that would be almost exclusively how clunky it is, and that would be more confusing.
But if they had a really succinct way of saying we're right and you're wrong, you would go ahead and say
the succinct way of saying that would be orthodox. And calling themselves the Orthodox Church, they're implicitly calling everyone else heterodox.
Yeah, but what I'm
and we
saying
use that term.
Yeah, but it seems like there was a shift within the Mormon community to make them seem like mainstream Christians.
That's right. It probably is
Matt.
situational to a certain point.
No.
I don't think...
I want to hear what Joe has to say to this, but here's what I would say. This is a demonstration of sort of classic gatekeeping mentality. Like, I am the one that's going to determine this about this person, and I'm refusing to call them by their actual name because I don't want other people to think that I'm saying they're Christian. I think we have to be really careful there. I think there is good intentions by Matt to protect the fidelity of what is actually considered historic Christian as a Roman Catholic, but we have to be really careful that we're not gatekeeping and that is trumping our opportunity to have clarity and compassion and charity in our engagement with Latter-day Saints. So can't go there, man. I just can't do it.
It probably is situational to a certain point. I don't think anyone who's hearing certainly this conversation is going to come away saying, "Oh,
Joe Hashman."
Yeah, Joe thinks this is the real Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Like if I'm burning the bridge over, I'm using a term that they find offensive, I'm burning the bridge needlessly. Okay. Rather burn the bridge over, you guys are teaching these things that are dangerous to
you
salvation.
might be convincing me, so I'm
okay,
open to changing this. I've been calling it, I honestly didn't know Mormons saying that was offensive. I really didn't.
It was, I mean, Mormon was a name given by outsiders. It was
this is what I like.
A help.
Let me, this is the reason why I wanted to go here. These guys have been talking for an hour and 20 minutes, where the video thumbnail and the title and the first few minutes of the video seem so divisive and incendiary. I like that the more they talk, the more that there's this openness to kind of check themselves and to be respectful toward Latter-day Saints. This is where we want to arrive, even if we have to work through some of these passionate disagreements or these strong opinions and assertions we might have about somebody else's faith paradigm.
So Latter-day Saints is a fairly neutral, like that is not a term that
I'll call them LDS.
Is imposed by the outside.
You've changed my mind. I'll call them LDS
Excellent.
from now on.
Good.
Yeah, thank you. You won the debate. Now let's talk about your recent interaction.
All right, so this is I think a healthy place for two Roman Catholics, honestly in a Roman Catholic echo chamber, are moving in a healthy direction. Even though I still disagree with the assertion that Latter-day Saints are atheists, and I really don't like the title that says the incoherence of Mormonism, but I think this could be considered progress. At the end of the day, here's what I will say. This interfaith conversation that involves Latter-day Saints is continuing to expand. I'm seeing more and more Latter-day Saint influencers getting involved in the conversation. And the more they get involved in the conversation, the more Protestants are going to stand up. And also the more Roman Catholics are going to stand up, and maybe even Orthodox. So I think this is a good opportunity for us, even within our echo chambers, to just be careful about how we're framing somebody who's other than us and prepare ourselves for clarity and charity in ways that we can show our love for God who has loved us, that it would be reflected in how we love one another, and that ultimately we can have clarifying conversations about truth, about God, about Jesus, and about salvation. So I know this gets pretty dicey and tricky here, but let's also be patient with one another. I think that Joe has really good intentions here. I would love to meet him someday. I would also love to start a channel called Hello Catholics, and maybe he could help me with that. But right now it's hard enough for one guy to be running one YouTube channel, so we're just going to put a pause on that. But I hope the conversation expands. So if you like this video, hit the thumbs up, subscribe. It really helps the channel out. And until next time, I'll see you later, Saints.